Good evening to all of you. Namaskar. So, with this note, it's my honor and privilege to invite all of you on behalf of Secretary Sahitya Akademi, Miss Pallavi Prashant Holkarji, because ma'am is in an official tour to attend some other meeting. So, ma'am told me to carry out the program. So, at the outset, it's my great honor and privilege to introduce the panel of experts of today's cultural exchange program of Indo-Russian delegates meet. We have with us in our midst Sri Borentakia Galina Edudrona and Sri Emilin Alexei Alexandrovich. We have in our midst who has come forward to accept my request to chair today's this program, Professor Udanarayan Singh Nachiketa जी. हम इस सभागार में हमारा साथ उपस्थित बड़े बड़े दिग्गज साहित्यकार जो डॉक्टर रफीक मसूद जी, जो साहित्य अकादमी की साहित्य अनुवाद पुरस्कार से पुरस्कृत, और हमारा साथ डॉक्टर के एन तिवारी जी, जो हिंदी के प्रसिद्ध कवि साहित्यकार. हमारा साथ इस वक्त वी हैव इन आवर मिस्ट श्री गौरी शंकर रैना जी, प्रख्यात कश्मीरी साहित्यकार लेखक. वी हैव विद आवर मिस्ट डॉक्टर सुकृता पाल कुमार जी, ए ग्रेट इंग्लिश राइटर, एंड मेनी अदर स्कॉलर्स वी हैव इन आवर मिस्ट Sangeet Agarwal ji, we have many other friends from SNA, from Medical Academy, and many other scholars, those who are gathered here. So, a warm welcome to all of you to this today's evening cultural exchange program. Before proceeding further, may I request Anupam Tiwari ji to kindly come forward and honor all our guests with our traditional gamcha and a packet of books to all our guests. Starting with Sri Dimitri ji.
This is a typical Assamese gamucha. Very beautiful.
Thank you, Anupam ji. मैं अनुरोध करना चाहता हूँ डॉक्टर देवेंद्र कुमार देवेश जी को, जो भारत की तरफ से जो आए हुए हैं हमारे विद्वज्जनों को सम्मान करने के लिए. स्टार्टिंग विद प्रोफेसर उदयनारायण सिंह नचिकेता जी. Dr. Valita ma'am, Professor Ranjana Saxena ma'am, and Sri Mohan Himtani sir. Thank you so much, Devesh ji. Now I'll ask the chair to start the program with his opening remarks.
Thank you, Dr. Suresh Kumar. The all the Russian writers are usually available to us in Indian languages directly from Russian. There are many, many writers that I have read in Bangla, directly translated from Russian to Bangla. And unlike many other countries where you have to go through the English translations, many of our languages, particularly Ranjana ji has done translation into Hindi, you can directly see that the affinity that we have with the Russian literature and so much of learning that we have derived from writings in Russian that have been reflected in our own writings. And in fact, as far as India is concerned, Russia has always been a very interesting model of how things have happened, how things can happen, and how things will happen. So this is very important for us to understand. And I'm particularly pleased that all of you have also visited my university, Amity University, Haryana, in the morning, where I couldn't be there present to receive you there. My colleagues received you there. And we would like to know more about the current state of writing, current state of thinking, what exactly the young scholars, young writers, young filmmakers, because some of you are also into production of films based on your stories, what they have been thinking and doing. Because for us, interested in films in India, we know that Battleship Potemkin is one of the foremost films from where we began our watching journey, how exactly we began. So there's hardly any film society which has its events without showing the classical Russian films. So we would also like to know what is the thinking, because there are a lot of interesting experiments that are happening in India, and not all those experiments are really mainstream Bollywood films. Many of those the experiments are coming from so many other languages like Malayalam or Bangla or Marathi or some other languages. So in a way, it's a very highly multilingual country, just as the Russia and the neighborhood have also been extremely multilingual, and there have been so many languages which have contributed to building of the modern Russian literature. There have been writers writing from various other countries in former Soviet Union who have also been contributing to Russian literature. So this is very interesting model for us to learn how exactly multilingualism survives and how many languages give lot of hope to new kind of assimilated thinking process. So that's exactly why we are all here, passionate to understand and listen to some of you to tell us what exactly are your current thinking. And in many of the visits that we have made from Sahitya Akademi to many countries as part of the writers' delegation, the exchanges have usually been quite a good learning experience for many of us. And I'm sure you will also go back from India with some memories of having met some good writers. And here in this hall in particular, we have very, very eminent people, quite a few major writers sitting here who may be willing to talk to you about their own kind of work, their own kind of interest that they have. And I brought some of my books to show you if you want to look at them at some point of time. And welcome to Sahitya Akademi.
Sir, with your permission of the chair, let me introduce the panelists to the August gathering. Sri Dmitry Alexandrovich is a Russian fantasy writer, author of a large number of works in fantasy genre for children and teenagers. And he is also a film as such director and producer, and he is a candidate of philological sciences. And we have with us Miss Brunexia Galino Edudrovna, He is a specialist in organizing educational events for the Union of Writers of Russia. She organizes projects of schools of literary mastery in the region of Russia, international projects in BRICS countries, and internal events of Union of Writers. And we have also with us Miss Sri Emilin Alexandrovich, is a manager of international projects, organizer of all Russian and international projects for philologists, writers, and literary scholars, as well as correspondences exchanges between BRICS countries. He also translates from English into Russian. In our Miss Dr. Vanita ma'am, she's a retired professor from University of Delhi. She's a Punjabi poet, translator, and critic. She's a member of the Sahitya Akademi's Punjabi Advisory Board, and she was also a former convener of Punjabi Advisory Board. She has received many prestigious awards, including Sahitya Akademi Award and SARC Writers Awards too. And we have in our Miss Professor Ranjana Saxena ji has been a professor of Slavic and Finno-Ugarian studies at the University of Delhi. She has specialized in Russian literature, Russian women's writing, and feminism, and has previously served as the head of the Department of Slovenic and Finno-Ugarian Studies. She has also been recognized with the Pushkin Medal by the Russian Federation for her work in promoting Russian culture. We have in our midst our own chair, Professor Udanaran Singh Nachiketa ji. He is an eminent poet, writer, translator, scholar. He writes in Maithili and as well as Bengali, a few recognized languages of Sahitya Akademi. He has a MA and PhD degree in linguistics. He is a professor and dean at MT University, Haryana. He was the first pro vice chancellor of Vishwabharati. Earlier, he had held important positions at Vishwabharati, Santiniketan, and Cultural Central Institute of Indian Languages, Mysore. With 7 collections of poems and 6 books of essays, 12 plays, he has translated many books and research papers and created 545 documentaries on language and literature. He is a recipient of Sahitya Akademi Award, Sir Ganganath Jha Memorial Award, Jyotirishwar Samman, and many others. We have in our midst Sri Mohan Himtani ji. He is a noted poet and critic in Sindhi. He did MA in Hindi and Sindhi. He began his career as a translator, announcer in All India Radio, Sindhi, and also served as a Under Secretary in the Cabinet Secretary rank, Secretariat. He has published 3 poetry collections. He also received Sahitya Akademi Sahityakar Samman from Sindhi Academy and many other awards. Now, may I request Dimtiti to kindly start his opening address.
Огромное спасибо. Это очень большая честь для меня, что я могу выступить перед вами. Я хотел спросить о формате. Очень много известных хороших писателей. Просто сколько у меня есть времени говорить и в каком формате будет проходить встреча?
Dmitry said that it is a very high honor to be here today, and he wants to ask what kind of format is he supposed to talk in and how much time he has to talk.
You may take 10 minutes.
Окей. Это очень хорошо. Да, я с огромным удовольствием расскажу о своих книгах, расскажу о своих впечатлениях об Индии. Мне очень понравилась Индия. В первый день я был ошеломлен дорожным движением, потом попал в парк, увидел кучу животных, обезьяны. Уже сейчас я уже чувствую себя на 3-й день. Я уже привык к Индии и ее полюбил.
At first, Dmitry was astonished by India and specifically by Indian traffic, but then later on he went to your local parks and was astonished by your nature, by the amount of both birds, by the amount of vegetation in the parks, and now on his 4th day in India he got used to it and is loving your country.
У Индии и России очень много пересечений, я это чувствую эмоционально. Мне больше всего понравилось, что в Индии большие многодетные семьи, и дети из семьи очень с большой нежностью относятся друг к другу, старшие братья заботятся о младших. Это вот одна из тем моего творчества. У меня есть серия, которую я очень люблю, «Моя большая семья». Она рассказывает о многодетной российской семье, которая переселилась из большого города в маленький город. Это очень популярная в России серия. Я подумал, как было бы здорово, если бы вот очень много пересечений для этой серии. Просто Индия золотая страна.
Dmitry has seen a lot of family with a lot of kids, and he loves the fact that elder siblings take care of younger siblings. He himself has a lot of children, and he wrote a book in the series titled My Big Family, which tells a story of a big family that moved from a big city to a small city, and he considers India and Russia to have a lot of common points of touch. And he thinks that India and Russia have a lot to learn from one another and have a lot of opportunities for further friendship and cooperation.
Я работал в Московском университете на кафедре истории русской литературы. Моя основная специализация – Золотой век русской литературы, история русской литературы XIX века. Я должен был быть преподавателем, но параллельно я стал писателем, и постепенно писательская деятельность вытеснила преподавательскую.
Dmitry used to work in the Russian state, Moscow State University, as a professor of Russian literary history. His specialty was the golden age of Russian history, and he used to write at the time as his secondary job. But it so happened that his secondary job became his primary one, and he didn't get to teach much.
Первоначально я писал книжки для младшего школьного возраста, ну, примерно там с 5 до 8 лет, это были повести, сказки небольшие, потом писал фантастику, а потом стал задумываться о том, что самой перспективной является универсальная семейная литература, которую могут читать и дети, и взрослые, и бабушки, которые будут объединять семью. И я выбрал жанр фэнтези как самый универсальный и одновременно объединяющий детскую литературу и взрослую.
At first, Dmitry used to write books for young children, aged 5 to 8. Then he started writing books for for older children, aged 14. And then he realized that there is this specific genre of literature, which he calls universal genre or family genre, i.e., a genre of books that can be read by the entire family, both children, their parents, and even their grandparents. And he chose the fantasy genre as this sort of bridge that connects all generations. And now he writes books primarily in the fantasy genre.
Моей первой такой книгой в этом универсальном фэнтези-жанре стала пародия на Гарри Поттера, называлась «Таня Гротер». В ней 14 книг, там пародийной является только первая книга, дальше альтернативная история получает уже свое отдельное течение. Это очень популярная в России серия из 14 частей, и читатель узнал меня как раз вот после этой серии, после Тани Гротер. Также очень известным является сериал «Мефодий Буслаев». Это фэнтези-сериал, там заложено много философских смыслов о борьбе с добром и злом. Там 19 книг, это очень большой блок магического реализма. То, что я делаю, это относится, есть различие между фэнтези и магическим реализмом. То, что я делаю, это ближе к магическому реализму. Ну, вот, например, Маркес писал магический реализм, там больше смыслов можно вложить в текст.
His first book in the fantasy genre was Tanya Grotter, a book series that started as a parody of Harry Potter, but eventually it split, became its own thing, where only the first book in the series of 12 was a parody. It was done simply to bring attention to the young writer, and the entire book series is very beloved in Russia. His other book series is Mefodий Буслаев, a more serious book series about the fight of evil and good. It is not a fantasy book, but rather a magical realism book. The difference between fantasy and magical realism is that magical realism is more serious. You can add more nuance to the characters, more nuance to the plot, and talk about serious matters, where fantasy is more lighthearted.
Самой сложной моей книгой является сериал «Школа ныряльщиков» The School of Divers. Там 12 частей, это такая довольно сложная философская фантастика. Обычно читатель узнает обо мне после Тани Гротер, Фоти Буслаева, серии «Моя большая семья». Это уже для самого умного читателя. Очень люблю эту серию, я больше всего стараний вложил, когда я писал вот «Школу ныряльщиков».
Another one of his series is the Школа ныряльщиков series, or Divers School. It is a very hard to understand series because it involves a lot of reading, it involves a lot of knowledge of background, of Slavic folklore, of Russian religion, and Dmitri's usual readers don't really understand those books because they read them after Tanya Grota, after easier, more comical books, and Школа ныряльщиков, the school, is hard to approach. But Dmitry put in a lot of work into it, put in a lot of philosophy into those books, and considers the entire series very important.
Ну, кроме того, у меня есть две книжки по русской истории. Это «Древняя Русь» и «Заступники земли российской». Это книги о раннем периоде российской истории. Я очень люблю историю и люблю писать исторические книги. Я даже думал одно время, что, может быть, мне стоило поступать не на филологический факультет, а на исторический.
He also wrote books based on the history of Russia, for example, two books, The Ancient Rus and The Defenders of the Russian Land. He really likes Russian history, he studied Russian history, and at the time he debated whether to become a philologist or a scientist of Russian history.
Здесь мы представляем Союз писателей России и пришли с подарками. Это как классические книги «Преступление и наказание», Евгений Онегин, которые вы все хорошо знаете, так и современные книги, которые выходят сейчас в России. Это вот, например, лучшие переводы национальной литературы с языков народов России. Это большой стиль, это вот современная литература, материалы научно-практические, как и конференции. Мы тоже с удовольствием их дарим. Здесь статьи, посвященные тенденциям развития современной русской литературы. Ну вот, кроме того, тоже современный роман Александра Проханова «Меченосец», он такой имеет большое социальное значение, и поэтический сборник, и очень красиво изданная книга Маяковского «Облако в штанах». Это одна из лучших книг Маяковского.
We came here with the Union of Writers of Russia and brought you gifts. For example, books of classical Russian literature like Evgeny Onegin or Eugene Onegin and Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky, books that are known all over the world, as well as books of contemporary and modern Russian literature. For example, the materials of Russian scientific conversations about literature, about where it's going, about the tendencies of the modern Russian literature, as well as a compilation of translations from the languages of Russian ethnic minorities into Russian language, as well as poems by contemporary Russian writers. And Mayakovsky, a poet of the very early Soviet Union, a book by him called The Cloud in Trousers.
Было бы очень здорово, если бы нам удалось в результате этой встречи заложить основы такого культурного моста между индийской и русской культурой, чтобы современные писатели Индии могли переводиться в России, современные писатели России могли переводиться в Индии, и чтобы наша встреча переросла в долговременное сотрудничество. Был бы очень рад.
It would be very good if this meet became a sort of foundation for future friendships, for future collaborations, where contemporary and modern Indian writers are translated in Russia, and Russian contemporary writers are translated in India, and we become closer together.
Огромное спасибо.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. Now I'll open the discussion with the Professor Ranjana Saxena ji.
I speak in English. Yeah, somebody will translate.
I can speak English too. I try to speak Russian, but I understand everything.
You can understand English.
Yes, I know. So, as I understand, as he has said, Dmitry Yemitz is one of the most popular, famous writer, Russian writer today in the genre of fantasy. And as he already said that his very popular book that he wrote in the early century in 2002, yeah, that was a parody of Harry Potter, that is Tanya Grotter. That was the title of the book that he wrote. Yeah, and that book, of course, became hugely popular, and then he's in Russia amongst the teenagers. Yeah, that we say padrasto, the teenagers, amongst the teenagers. And I think that was, of course, something very interesting, that the Russian writers, they are giving so much of weightage and so much of space to children's writing. So Детская литература, children's literature, is hugely popular. I mean, and I think this is the tradition which is coming from the old times, I would say from the Soviet times, when we used to have these beautiful books coming from Russia. I think all my colleagues, they remember. And nobody can forget those, glossy children's books which we all used to buy for all our nieces and nephews, which of course are no longer there. Yeah? And we all, of course, visit and we reminiscence about those books. So that is a tradition which is continuing. So that's very interesting. That is there is a continuation. There is, of course, huge change that has taken place, but there is a very big continuation in terms of the attitudes, in terms of the writers, how they are continuing with the themes and the genre. So Детская литература as children's literature is hugely popular. And the book that Dmitry Yemitz wrote, Tanya Grotter, that is which he calls a parody of Harry Potter, but which of course has a lot of elements which are connected with the Russian culture. I mean, there are a lot of elements which are coming from the Russian stories, сказка, folk tales, from the Russian folk tales, like Baba Yaga and things like that. They are coming from there. So if I wanted to put a question to Dmitry Yemitz, and I think we can get down to the discussion, is that you could have been a teacher of history, as you said. You could have been a teacher of, you're a philologist, you could have been a teacher of history. You wanted to teach also, but you took down to writing. So my question to you would be that what really made you write for the teenagers? Because I don't know, my friends here, writer friends, I would be very enlightened if they tell us that who are the writers who are actually specially writing for the teenagers of the country. Yeah, and that's a huge responsibility. Yeah, addressing the teenagers of the country who themselves, who are looking for their own identity, who are at the stage, who are lost, who are trying to actually look for themselves, and at that time their best friends are the books actually. I remember my son, he would not, as much as I would tell that, look, I'm your friend, treat me like your friend, but no teenager treats the parents as friends, that we all know. So the books are the best friends that the teenagers have at the moment, and then especially like as in Harry Potter, in Tanya Grotter also, we have teenagers being introduced to good and evil, and they're being introduced to what is right, what is wrong. They're also being introduced to the self, how to look for themselves, So I would be actually wanting to know what really made you, I mean, we are not even going into whether it's a parody or it is not, and how different it is from the English Harry Potter, but what really made you to get into writing for the children? First you said wrote for children and then for teenagers. So that must be a specific impulse, yeah? Or if I would say that, okay, I know that writers do not choose their subjects, the subjects choose them. So in your case, what really happened that you actually went to, writing about teenagers?
Огромное спасибо, очень интересный вопрос, с большим удовольствием на него отвечу.
Thank you very much. This is a very interesting question, and he will gladly answer.
Вначале я писал научные статьи, и научные статьи пишутся очень занудным, тяжелым, многообразным языком, и я от него очень уставал. Меня раздражали филологические статьи, которые мне приходилось писать.
At first, Dmitry used to write a lot of scientific papers, which are, of course, written with the scientific language, which is very dry, very specific, and Dmitry got very tired of it, writing the same thing in the same way over and over again.
И я стал писать вначале повести-сказки для самых маленьких. Вот первой моей повестью-сказкой стал «Дракончик-пыхалка». Это история о маленьком дракончике, который потерял маму, потом «Приключения домовят», «Властелин пыли». Это все сказки для малышей.
And for a change, Dmitry started writing books for young children. For example, this is his first book, Дракончик Пыхалка, Blowy the Dragon. It's about a young dragon who lost his mother. Then he wrote 2 more parts about his further adventures.
Потом я стал постепенно задумываться, что детская литература, по сути дела, является утилитарным жанром за счет того, что язык детской литературы часто отличается от языка взрослой литературы и меньше смыслов, как бы меньше наполнения прозы может происходить. И тогда я, когда читал письма Чехова, у Чехова был брат, у брата был маленький сын, и он ему покупал перо, уже тогда была ферма Нестле, и он покупал ему каши Нестле своему брату. И он ему сказал, что не нужно покупать Нестле, это обычная крупа, что нет еды детской, нет еды взрослой, а есть часть еды взрослой, которую нельзя давать детям. И также нет детской литературы, а есть литература хорошая, серьезная, взрослая, но с понятными нравственными фильтрами. И это есть детская литература, то есть это хорошая, крепкая, серьезная проза, выражающая душу автора, но с какими-то вещами, которые, может быть, детям пока не стоит давать, то есть с какими-то нравственными фильтрами.
Dmitry started writing children's books because it was a utility genre, genre with which you couldn't talk about certain things because children simply can't understand certain things, or you can't talk about certain things with children because they're just not old enough. And at the time, Dmitry was reading Anton Chekhov's letters to his brother. His brother had a young child, and he fed his young child porridge by Nestle. Nestle was a thing back then. And the brother said that Nestle is basically the same grain, but it's milled finer. And Dmitry compares this finer milled grain with children's literature. It is basically the same thing as adult literature, but it is milled finer. You mill your literature finer, you lose certain things when you write books for children, and you lose certain thoughts, you lose certain philosophies, you lose certain ideas which you would want to talk about, but you can't because you write for children.
И первоначально я писал книги фэнтези, это не только Таня Гротер, которая, конечно, принесла мне популярность, это и Мефодий Буслаев, который очень популярен в России, большая серия школы ныряльщиков. А сейчас, в последнее время, я пришел к реалистической литературе, вот к серии «Моя большая семья». Мне кажется, что это интересные книги, мне было очень приятно, если бы вы смогли их прочитать. И мы приготовили папку, я приготовил папку электронную с книгами, могу с удовольствием поделиться с любым из вас по QR-коду, вы сможете прочитать книги, очень бы мне этого хотелось, потому что мне кажется, что нужно общаться, читать. Очень мало в России, к сожалению, мало знают индийских писателей. В России, в Индии плохо знают российских писателей. Нужно как-то сближать культуру, и я уверен, это будет вполне реально.
After that, he started writing books for all the children, for teenagers, for example, Tanya Grota series or Mefodий Buslaev series, which is another series about young boys' adventures. He fights evil with magic. But lately, Dmitry has started writing books in the realistic genre. For example, Be My Big Family book, which he hopes you read. For example, he has a QR code which you can scan, and you'll get a link to a folder which has his books in both Russian and English. And he hopes that you will read his books, that your people will read his books, because a modern Englishman doesn't really know the modern Russian writer, and vice versa. The modern Russian man doesn't know the modern Indian writer, and he hopes that we can do something to bring our people, our cultures together.
Yeah.
Namaskar. Hello everybody, a very nice meeting we are having. I'm just want to ask that just we are talking about teenagers and children writing, and at present, as the Ukraine war is going on for last 2 years almost, and how the children and teenagers are affected and taking this war effects and how much they are affected? Do they reflect in their sayings or in any kind of literature or writing? What do you think, sir?
Как война с Украиной повлияла на детей, как это отражается на их привычках, на, собственно, их речи. Мы привели книги сюда.
Но на самом деле русская культура последних лет переживает рассвет, и очень много стало появляться сильных авторов. То есть получалось, что национальное развитие русской культуры активно началось как раз вот после начала украинского кризиса. Мы здесь как посланцы культуры, но я вижу, что происходит оздоровление, что гораздо больше выходит традиционных книг, гораздо выше интерес к национальной русской культуре. То есть получилось, что кризис на Украине привел к тому, что наши читатели стали больше интересоваться национальными книгами, классикой, и произошло, ну, я бы сказал, что такое оздоровление культурное во многих смыслах.
Despite what some people might think, in the last couple of years, the Russian culture has only grown. For example, after the Ukrainian crisis, culture has shifted towards our own traditions. We started looking inside, we started looking at our own origins, at what makes us us, what differentiates us from other people. And modern Russian writers started writing more works about our historical roots, about our religious roots, and we started to become our own thing finally. As Dmitry calls it, our culture has only become healthier and healthier.
Dr. Vanitha, you can take that.
It's very nice to hear you, and I was reminding my childhood, because when I was child, I was a baby, I used to read Indian, Russian children books, and they were so interesting, and they were very cheap. They were not very expensive here, when anyone can afford. And its printing and theme were also very attractive. What's the position in now? Is it very affordable or expensive now in these times? And one more question, that your children, what they like most? Magical realism stories, or science fiction, or poetry? What's their favorite?
Сначала, насколько дорогие современные книги, позволяют читать, потом ваши дети.
В России, значит, какая сейчас ситуация с культурой в самых общих моментах? Наряду с бумажной литературой существует очень много электронной литературы и крайне популярны аудиокниги. Постепенно в России аудиоформат вытесняет бумажные книги, а аудиоформат является, по сути, бесплатным. То есть любой человек, подписанный на большие агрегаторы, там, как Яндекс или другие, у них огромное количество бесплатных книг, они могут слушать их с утра до вечера. И популярность книг сейчас, бумажные книги, к сожалению, читают меньше людей, больше слушают аудио или в электронных форматах. Дети чаще всего читают до определенного возраста все-таки фэнтези. Сейчас очень популярный жанр young adult. Я к этому жанру отношусь с некоторой осторожностью, но вижу, что еще очень в России сейчас популярна азиатская литература, корейская литература, японская. И я к этому сложно отношусь, потому что я больше люблю такую традиционную русскую культуру, но могу сказать, что большой интерес действительно, видимо, после того, как аниме-сериалы появились, интерес часто именно смещается в ту сторону.
The situation is a bit difficult because in modern literature the paperback books have become less prevalent, the electronic books are more prevalent, of course, and the prevalence of electronic media has skyrocketed the audiobook genre, which is very popular nowadays. The children, young children tend to read fantasy books, of course, and then they kind of grow up out of fairy tales and they don't take them seriously, and they start reading what is called the young adult genre, which Dmitry doesn't really like. He hesitates to read those books, and as far as what children are reading about, in modern day Russia, it is primarily the Asian literature that is booming. For example, books from Korea or Japan, which have become popular in the last decades, primarily because of the populace of Japanese anime cartoons, and children tend to read those specifically.
Now what do you fix the age of children? Because now with the effects of e-media and social media, e-culture, they are not that type of innocent. Until the age of 14, when they come, they are not innocent. In our age, in our times, we used to call them babies, children. But what do you feel about now, about the children?
Кто для вас вообще дети? Да, современные 14-летние, они отличаются до вас 14 лет. Вы 14 лет были невинные, сегодняшние 14-летние, они совершенно не невинные. Кто для вас дети?
Очень интересная ситуация сейчас в России, я не знаю, как в Индии. У нас очень часто сейчас бывает, что молодые люди 30 лет живут вместе с родителями, ведут себя как дети, читают детские книжки, и это большая проблема. То есть сейчас, мне кажется, очень часто детство в России заканчивается там в 35 лет. У нас есть как бы молодые писатели, общество которых мы представляем, и там, в общем, 35-летних детей огромное количество. Это очень странно, но тем не менее это так. То есть сейчас получается, что детство вообще универсальный период. И даже несмотря, мне сейчас 51 год, но мне почему-то кажется, что я еще ребенок.
Dmitry says that he doesn't know what the situation is like in India, but in Russia there are a lot of children. For example, there are a lot of 30-year-old children who still live with their parents who are still reading children's books. And he considers that such thing as a child, it doesn't really exist anymore. It is an amorphous thing. For example, the Union of Young Writers, which we represent, has a lot of 35-year-old children. And Dmitry says that he is 51, but he still thinks of himself as a sort of a child. He thinks that his childhood hasn't really ended. So such thing as a child has only expanded and has grown as children do.
Intelligent?
I'm writing in Sindhi from word Sindhu. Sindhu is derived from Hindu is derived from Sindhu. So I'm proud to writing in Sindhi as a poet. Primarily, I'm writing poetry, and I'm very proud to say that this Sahitya Akademi Award winner Sundari Uttam Chandani ji and A.J. Uttam has translated so many Russian stories into Sindhi language, and we got the award Soviet Land Nehru Puraskar. Sholkov and Gorky's stories has been translated into Sindhi language. This is for information. And I am writing poetry, as I said, that I'm just want to express the war effect in poetry. And generally people in Sindhi and other literature also, it is now in fear, in blood, live telecast. Dekhkar live telecast, I'm just giving you fervor of Sindhi language also. Live telecast, इसी live telecast दुनिया में हलंदड़ तबाहो बर्बादी जो बुद्ध जो मौन थी भी वह बेचैन देखकर लाइव टेलीकास्ट यूक्रेन सीरिया में चल रही बर्बादी का बुद्ध का मौन भी हो गया है बेचैन। अब हर तरफ लाश ही लाश है, शांति ही शांत है। खंडर हो गए, बिखर गए सीरिया यूक्रेन शहर में, कीव शहर में। बुद्ध जो मौन टूटी हुआ है एक दफो वरी तक्षशिला खां बुद्ध का मौन भी एक बार फिर टूट गया है तक्षशिला के बाद। लेटे लेटे मुस्कुराते बुद्ध जैसे कह रहे हो, हम सब के आसपास अंदर बाहर चल रहा है एक युद्ध। ये तब तक चलता रहेगा जब तक हमारे अंदर से बाहर नहीं आ जाता बुद्ध, हमारे अंदर से बाहर नहीं आ जाता। तो यूक्रेन वॉर इज so have lasting effects. It's just writing about war effect nowadays. I'm just sharing, and in poetry, and Sindhi poetry also, modern poetry also have such kind of expression. Vaste Rohi and Prem Prakash, Namdev Tarachandani. We have so many modern poets in Sindhi languages nowadays. They are very brilliant and very fine poets in Sindhi language. It is the language of Shah Abdul Latif. Sindhi is a has classical literature from Shah Abdul Latif, mainly affected by Sufism. It has Sufism stream also, and that's why you will find the effect of peace, and there are all we find there in their writings a kind of tradition of peace. That's why the Sindhi people, the Sindhi writers, apart from modern poetry, always followed the path of Sufism. In their poetry, in their short stories and modern stories, all kind of literature we have nowadays.
Просто историческая справка. Поэму прочитал про своих людях, потому что на них тоже война сильно отразилась. В литературе отражается и мир, и война.
Да, это так и есть. У Толстого есть известный роман «Война и мир». Кстати, я почти уверен, что для многих это будет новая информация. Когда Толстой писал, слово «мир» в России имело двойное значение. И вот «Война и мир» в слове «мир» она писалась через букву, похожую на «ай» с точкой, и она означала «мир» не в значении «peace», а в значении «людское сообщество». То есть буквальный перевод романа «Война и мир» not war and peace, but war and people.
When Tolstoy wrote his book called «Война и мир», the word «мир» in the modern Russian language, the word «мир» is written the same way and has two meanings. But when he wrote it, there were two words, both pronounced «мир». And one word meant peace, the other word meant people, society. And when Tolstoy wrote it, in those times, he chose the second word, society. So it's the fact that the book is translated as war and peace is an inaccuracy. It shouldn't be translated as war and peace. He didn't use the first word. It is translated. It should be translated as war and people. It is also about not the peace, not the lack of war, but the war and how it impacts people, how it changes them forever.
Sir? Yeah. Two questions I have. One is, how is philology? You said that you are also interested in philological sciences, because I am also a philologist. So how is philology actually impressed you to get into writing? Because philology, of course, one good thing that happens is it allows us to read across different languages, their folklore, their stories, their ancient texts. So how did philology help you in conceptualizing yourself as a writer?
Ну, на самом деле филология очень сильно на меня повлияла. Вначале, когда я писал статьи по литературоведению, меня часто не нравились многие филологические работы. Мне казалось, что филолог неправильно понимает писателя, он его упрощает. Например, писатель пишет там: в кабинете героя были синие шторы, и он начинает там синий является цветом мира, мудрости, а также шторы являются там символом ткани, жизни. И я чувствую, что это не так работает. То писатель мыслит совершенно по-другому, чем филолог. И когда я писал, филолог во мне помогает почувствовать писателя, писатель помогает филологу. Еще я очень хорошо знаю, я очень люблю читать письма писателей, воспоминания. Очень вам советую мои любимые тексты. Прочитайте воспоминания Анны Григорьевны Достоевской, это жена Достоевского, воспоминания Анны Достоевской. Они вам очень понравятся. Я уверен, что есть перевод. Эта книга замечательная. Вы совсем по-другому почувствуете Достоевского. Вот очень советую.
At first, Dmitry wrote and read a lot of philology books, and he considers them quite dry and difficult to read, because the philologist and the writer think differently. For example, if a writer says there are a lot of black chairs in this room, the philologist would go, black, it is the color of darkness, so the room was very dark, chairs, someone was sitting down, they were put down, when in fact the situation could have been completely different. So Dmitry's philological starts, his philological start and his writing career, they synergize a bit, and one of them props up another. And he recommends that you read Anna Dostoevsky's diaries. Anna Dostoevsky was Dostoevsky's wife, and after you read those diaries, you will completely rethink Dostoevsky as a writer. You will rethink him as a person, and he is pretty sure that those diaries are translated as well.
Извините, вы имеете в виду Анна Сниткина, да?
Да, Анна Григорьевна Достоевская, да, Анна Сниткина, это ее девичья фамилия.
Anna Grigorievna Snitkina, she was actually, and which is the second wife, Dostoevsky's second wife.
Да, но в переводе, скорее всего, нужно будет искать Достоевская, да, а Сниткина это ее фамилия девичья.
If you are looking for those diaries, you should probably look up Anna Dostoevskaya. Snitkina was her maiden name, and she took up Dostoevsky's surname when she married him.
Just one more point I wanted to make. Sometimes what happens is it's also language's tradition. Like this is magical realism. It's about ghosts, but ghosts which are friendly ghosts. And this book has sold, all copies are sold out. One of the best publishers in Kolkata has brought it out. And if you look at the illustrations and all that, it's beautifully done. 14 ghost stories. Okay, and we have a tradition in our country that before the Festival of Lights, one day before that, in the darkness, when the ghosts come. So that is the 14th day before Amavasya. So Bhut Chaturdashi is the book of 14 books, stories on the ghost. So what happens is, if I write this in Maithili, I cannot. So I write in two languages, Maithili and Bengali. Bengali has a lot of tradition of magical realism, and therefore it comes natural and easy for me to write like this. But if I want to write this in Maithili, I cannot write. Although most of my books, a large number of books are in Maithili, the plays and poems. But this kind of stories I can't write in Maithili because Bengali is full of that. And then you also have very famous writers. There hardly any major novelist in Bengali who is a serious novelist who has not written for children. This is very interesting tradition that our language has in that. So it also depends on what kind of language tradition you have, and do you have so much of writing for children. Now, to give you an example, this is a book about the children's poems. Now, it's a very famous painter has done this illustration. Almost every part of the book is full of illustrations by a very famous painter. So this is also something which is possible in Bangla, but I cannot write this in Maithili. So tradition is also very important. I think Russian tradition has been very rich for writing, as she said, that Vanita said that we used to read so much of beautifully illustrated books. Progress publishers had used to bring them out, and the the translation efforts that were made by the government at that time from the former Soviet Russia, where used to take Indian writers, put them there for 3 years. Those 3 years, they learn the language, sit with the Russian authors and Russian translators, and then directly translate Russian into our languages. That tradition worked very well. Yeah, very well. Because almost everything that I read in Russian was in my language, not in English. That's very interesting.
Can I raise a question? I feel in India there is a lot of mythology that comes into play. A lot of mythology and big epics like Ramayana and Mahabharata. There are stories that are driven out of that. And for children, or middle age or old, anyone. And it would just depend on how the presentation is. If it is for children, then there'll be more illustrations. If it is for older people, then metaphors and larger themes are looked at. Is there any mythology or is it world mythology that Russia depends on, or is there some indigenous Russian mythology? I know about folk tales, that you have a lot of folk tales, but is there a mythology which comes out of epic tales for children?
Прям эпик, русских эпик. Потому что у них есть там баяна, эпик.
Понял. У нас очень богатая в России мифология. Это и Кощей, и Баба Яга, и Кикиморы, и Болотницы, и Шишиги. Очень богатый был славянский языческий мир. Там были сотни разных духов. Каждый из них отвечал за что-то. Там Леший отвечал за лес, Болотница за болото, Кикимора это была таким злобным болотным духом с длинными ногами. Очень много у нас интересных фольклорных пересечений. Например, Баба Яга, Яги, это общий, получается, персонаж и в индийской мифологии, и в нашей. Очень я советую, есть сказки Афанасьева. Там очень много мифологических сюжетов в сказках Афанасьева, и там много разбирается фольклорных русских конструкций. Это такой очень серьезный научный труд. Я советую его читать немножко упрощенные сказки, потому что они лучше воспринимаются, чем академический труд. Это, наверное, лучший текст.
The Russian folklore has a lot of different characters in it. For example, Kikimoras or Leshis or Rusalkas, and it sometimes has common characters with Indian folklore. For example, Baba Yaga and Yagas are also present in Indian folklore. And the characters in Russian folklore were very stratified. For example, Leshi, his domain was the forest, Rusalka was rivers, Kikimoras were swamps. And Dmitry recommends, if you want to learn more about Russian folklore, about what lies in its basis, you should read fairy tales by Afanasyev, a traditional Russian writer. His folk tales are a bit simplified because they were written for children, but they serve as a very good introductory point into Russian cosmology.
Anyone? Yeah, please.
Before 5 years ago, Professor Babina and Professor Maxim, he is related from Moscow. He speaks very good Hindi and writing in Hindi about Ram Katha. So, do you know about that scholar? Just I want to know. Professor Babina.
Профессор Бабина, вы знаете такого?
Если честно, то мы лично не знакомы, но да, я слышал, что есть такой ученый, лично не знаком с ним.
To be honest, Dmitry has heard that name, has heard of the works, but doesn't know that person personally.
Because they speak very good Hindi and also English. She came in my house for the lunch. That
You
time
go
not
to
me.
Russian, learn Russian.
Yeah. But it is the important. We heard about Ram. Main word.
Ramkatha must be translated in Russian.
Oh, okay.
Okay. बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद. Thank you so much. And with the permission of chair, the other man, is she going to deliver? Galina? Is she going to speak something as
No.
concluding?
No, no. She's
Fine.
filming for
Acha, film.
Bhavan.
Fine. So thank you so much once again, all the visiting Russian writers to India, and once again thank you so much on behalf of Ms. Pallavi Prasant Holkarji, Secretary Sahitya Akademi. I sincerely thank all of you for attending this today's cultural exchange program, and especially Professor Udhanar Singh Nachiketa ji, Professor Ranjana Saxena ji, Dr. Vanita ji, and Sri Mohan Imtani ji for accepting our invitation to be panelist for today's cultural exchange program, and all the scholars and writers, those who have attended this program, and to make it a grand success. And I request all of you to kindly come for a group photo. After that, all of you are invited for a tea. Thank you.